ceasefire that in a way never was. Let's go over to California because he's permanently trapped there. He's actually from London, Republican Overseas Organisation here. Erol Morkoç. Hi, Erol, you still there?
Yeah, still here, still doing my sentence.
You're getting old, you know.
I know, grey hair.
Well, listen, thank you for joining us. You know, dramatic scenes yesterday, a 90-minute, maybe a 2-hour phone call between Trump and Putin, the upshot of which, of course, Trump calling for a full ceasefire. Some of the papers here today, Daily Telegraph, just came flat out and said it in their big headline, saying Putin rejects Trump's ceasefire call flat out. I think that was slightly unfair. He did get Putin to agree to a partial ceasefire where Putin said Russia would no longer, or at least for a 30-day period, would not attack Ukrainian infrastructure. By that we mean power stations, transport systems, the kind of things that help a country get by. So Putin agreed to that. The trouble was about 3 hours later, he launched this massive attack on Ukrainian infrastructure in a city called Slavansk, I think, knocking out the local power grid and depriving 100,000 residents of electricity. So he made this pledge to Donald Trump and then just ignored it. Now, I want to preface this by saying I think the world owes Donald Trump a debt of gratitude. I think what he's doing is in its way magnificent. He's trying to bring peace to a horrific war where hundreds of thousands, millions of young men are dying, you know, in frozen fields in the east. He's trying his best to stop this. He had to wait an hour for Putin to pick up the phone, which I thought was extremely rude of the Russian leader. But he did it. You know, well, Donald, he wouldn't have swallowed that easily, but he did it because I think he thinks it's important. And they came to at least a partial agreement, and then Putin just ignored it. Your thoughts?
You know, it's a difficult one to unpack because on one hand, I'm with you in that camp that is thankful that this president is doing something, anything towards detente. Now the question is, did anybody believe that Vladimir Putin was going to be, you know, the most trustworthy partner at the table? Probably not. It's incredibly disappointing. It's a setback for Trump. It's a setback for what we've thought we could do for Putin to have sent that strike so immediately after giving his word. However, I think that is why Donald Trump then moved on to the suggestion that perhaps the Americans should take some sort of cursory ownership of these power structures, therefore mitigating potentially this fact. But I won't sugarcoat it. I mean, when you're late to the phone call, it's disrespectful and it's not necessary. And when you're going to immediately renege on your commitment that you've made, it also doesn't look good. So I think right now we need to at least take what we can get. The 1-month ceasefire, let's see if we can hold that ceasefire. I mean, there's a lot of bad blood that still is going to be, you know, ironed out as the war winds down. If you look at the end of any conflict, there's always the awful battles that happen 2 days after a ceasefire, you know, back in the day and stuff like that. So there's going to be mistakes made, and it's certainly not off on a great footing. And I think maybe it's Vladimir Putin showing a little bit of a power play, saying, you know, hey, look, I can do what I want. And within some degree, maybe it's a domestic play for him, a way to show his domestic base that he's not just meeting and bending the knee to Donald Trump. And if that's what it took to then allow him to then work towards a bigger peace agreement, I think maybe there's a positive there. But this is going to take more negotiations. This is going to take Ukraine, obviously, eventually at that table. So right now we're trying to wind down hostilities and stop the killing. If this can lead to that, I think it's a positive. But unfortunately, it's not the start we hoped for.
No, I mean, as you say, Errol, I think it was always a foregone conclusion that Putin would play some games. The difficult dynamic here in terms of Donald Trump was, I think that, you know, obviously he did very well with Zelensky. He brought Zelensky into line, you know, unlike most Europeans or British people. I didn't think it was the worst crime in the world that perhaps, you know, Zelensky was treated slightly robustly when he was in the Oval Office. I didn't care about that because I thought it was leading to something, and it did. it's led to serious concessions on the part of Ukraine. It's led to the mineral deal clearly will be done, and that could in itself help preserve peace in Ukraine. So he's got Zelensky in Ukraine, Donald Trump, exactly where he wants them. They're basically eating out of his hands and saying, "What do you need us to do? We'll do everything you want," which is good. Because you can't make progress unless you have agreement. Now, the problem with that is Putin is desperate to prove he's not Zelensky. Russia is not Ukraine. It's like, yes, you got what you want with Zelensky. Don't you assume for a moment that you're dealing with the same. I'm much more powerful than Zelensky. Russia is much more powerful than Ukraine. So in a way, I think he was always going to make a power play. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a strong point, and I think it speaks to the domestic image that he has to maintain. You're very right to point out that he can't fold as quickly as Zelensky did. Unlike Zelensky, he actually has some cards. They might not be better than our cards, but in the short term game that he's playing, he has a lot of cards. I think perhaps it's something that Vladimir Putin can take as a small win, but also it's something that Donald Trump can look at and perhaps understand the situation. Maybe Donald Trump didn't read the room as well as he could have, and maybe if the negotiations had been conducted a little bit differently, now knowing that Vladimir Putin has an image to upkeep, I think one thing that you can look at is economic integration. You have Russia being the #2 aluminium supplier in the world behind China. So if you were to for example, welcome Russian aluminium back in the market, all of a sudden you would pull Moscow away from Beijing, who is now buying all of the aluminium. These kind of very specific little things you could do to reintegrate Russia back into the international world order, I think, is something that would give Putin the let's go with national prestige he's looking for. He doesn't like to be a pariah per se. He doesn't mind it. He's obviously not scared of being chased away from Brussels for 6 years or whatever, but ultimately he does want to be
Lucky guy.
Yeah, I know, for him. But ultimately, he does want to be back in the world market. And if you look at things like energy, which is the one thing that we can use to bring down global prices for everything, there's a lot of Russian energy. So perhaps this is something where Donald Trump needs to use his business mindset and realize that maybe Vladimir Putin's looking for business deals. Vladimir Putin doesn't care about the lives he's lost there. He doesn't care about those guys. He doesn't care about the Ukrainian lives. He doesn't really care about international law and world order. But what he does care about is perhaps enriching his cronies and the companies that run Russia and ultimately reintegrating Russia to the world market, as opposed to having to sell everything through India, through the back door into the market, which has been very beneficial for India, but not maybe very good for anybody else. And so I think maybe that's somewhere that Donald Trump needs to take this, because it needs to become a business negotiation. It looks like perhaps military negotiation will be ameliorated through economic integration. But obviously, then people will accuse us of allowing Russia to make money doing this and that. But then we have to point out to the Europeans, well, hey, you've been buying oil from this guy, funding his war. Why don't we end the war and perhaps take some of those minerals out of Russia in exchange for trade? Let's try that. I mean, versus continued war and death. I mean, it's worth a shot, I think.
I agree with you. And again, I think you cannot stress enough that what Donald Trump is doing is to be admired. You know, you can talk about, oh, America's going to make trillions of dollars out of this mineral deal. Well, fine, you know, hey ho, that's the way of the world. But if that brings about protection for Ukraine and brings peace to Ukraine, then I think we should all get behind it. What worries me, Erol, and let me know what you think, is so far Putin does not seem to be displaying much of a sense of compromise. It's arguable that what he's saying is, what I require of Ukraine is complete surrender. You know, I keep all the territory that I ever wanted. You're not allowed to have a peacekeeping force. You can't join NATO, and so on and so forth. I mean, Donald is going to have to get some compromises out of Putin. Do you fear that he will remain intransigent, or do you think that down the line Putin and the Kremlin might be a little bit more malleable than they are at the moment?
Yeah, I think the Kremlin is going to have to be more flexible. They had some realistic demands that you can expect, and then others that were unrealistic. For example, they demanded that we stop sharing intelligence with Ukraine. Well, we came out pretty quickly and said that's not going to happen. We're not going to stop sharing intelligence. That's not the same thing. Now, when it comes to the territories in the East, I don't think Vladimir Putin has any incentive to give any of that back. The only credit I can give President Putin, I suppose, is that it looks like he did allow some of those Ukrainian soldiers to retreat out of Kursk, where they had been encircled reportedly. Now, there's a lot of counter misinformation and narrative intelligence and all going on there, but there did seem to at least be that one glimmer of hope where there was a situation where Trump came out and talked about Putin promising to let these soldiers retreat. You saw open source intelligence media sort of verifying that. So there was, some silver lining there. But I think ultimately they're going to have to come to some agreement. A peacekeeping force of 100,000 European soldiers in Ukraine perhaps isn't going to be as useful as perhaps a smaller one. Maybe there'll be a size situation. NATO, I don't think many people in America want Ukraine to be part of NATO. And I think that the concept of having a buffer zone between NATO and the former Warsaw Pact or Soviet Union or current day Russian Federation, whichever dream you want to put together, the point is NATO membership isn't in our interest per se, so I think that's something that we could easily work with the Russians on.
I agree. I agree with that. I think that is the least contentious issue. Ukraine.
And in regards to the mining, also, it's a 50-50 split. If you were to do this deal with a mining company, it would be 90-10 for the company that's putting all the expertise and everything, and the host country gets 10. That's how Africa has been strip mined for the last 100 years. So 50-50 is really actually pretty charitable. In terms of this mining contract. It is meant to bolster Ukrainian domestic industry, which then by default would have pried it away from the Russian sphere. If the Americans hadn't been so foolish in their soft power, we could have slowly pulled the Ukraine into our orbit over 20, 30, 40 years. And instead, now we have to try to work with the pieces that are left. But I don't think Putin's going to give up his area. Like I've mentioned before, there's about $20 trillion of resources. 500,000 guys died for that. That's $40 million a guy. I mean, that's a good return on your investment. If you are a brutal dictator, why would you give that up?
Absolutely.
You wouldn't.
Absolutely. Now, I think that the watchword here is we should all watch and wait. I mean, this was never going to be done overnight. We didn't expect that phone call. Hey, we've finished the phone call. The good news is the war is off. It was never going to happen. So I think it's a bit by bit. Little step by little step, and I think we should get behind Trump as he tries to end this war. The one thing I'd say about Donald Trump, people say, oh, he's always got an angle. Yeah, he has kind of always got an angle, but genuinely, viscerally, you can tell that guy hates war. He just does not like war, and we should support him in that endeavour. Final question, Errol. The Sun newspaper over here today, the headline was, "What the puck?" Insofar as Putin and Donald Trump agreed to a ice hockey game between America and Russia. Who would win that?
I mean, the good old red, white, and blue. We would crush them just like in the Miracle on Ice. We've got to do it. It's already written.
Well, I'll tell you what, Errol. Sometimes diplomatically, maybe you should just lose. You know what I mean?
That's a good point. In this case, maybe. Yeah.
It's all a chess game. Errol, fantastic to talk to you. Can't wait for you to. When are you getting back to London? Do we know yet?
Around the end of April.
All right, we've got to get that beer in. Good to talk as always. Thank you so much. Erol Morkoç from the Republican Overseas Organization. He went to see his folks in California at Christmas, had a car crash, and has been stuck. He's injured. He can't get on a plane. He's been stuck there ever since. But it looks like he's getting back towards health and will be back in London soon. When we come back after this